Okay, hello everyone and welcome to another episode of NeoChats. This week we've got a really special treat for you. We're with Avigail Abarbanel, and I just wonder if you could just give us a quick introduction to yourself, Avigail, who you are and what you do.
Hi Mark, thanks for having me on your program. My name is Avigail Abarbanel. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. I've been in private practice for 22 years. The first 11 years I worked in Australia, in Canberra. I trained in Sydney originally, then moved to Canberra, and then I moved here to the Scottish Islands in 2010, and I've been working here and living here ever since. In my work, I work with adults, so that's 18 plus. I don't work with children or young people. And I work with individuals, with relationships, groups, and families. And I'm also a consultant and a writer. And I'm extremely passionate about sharing everything I know, which is why I'm grateful to you for inviting me to this interaction with you.
No, I'm very happy you could be here, and you know, for everyone out there, just to give a bit of background, I first met you, Abigail, on an amazing talk you did called "The Neuroscience of Self-Love," which really inspired me. And we talked a little bit a minute ago about some of the things that I still remember that I've taken forward. And what the reason I really wanted to talk to you today for our network is that if I could sort of sum up your approach to therapy in one word, it's certainly on the practical side. You know, it's that kind of there's no messing about. You want people to have the tools to help themselves. You want to share the knowledge. You want to just get things out there for people to be the best versions of themselves. And it's certainly summed up in the book that I picked up of yours here, Therapy Without a Therapist, DIY Good Mental Health and Growth, which is something that, having read through it, it's just so practical. Here's things you can do. Here's things you can think about. Here's maybe why this is happening, why that's happening. Take this into your own hands. There's no obscure language, terminology. It's not cloaked in mystery. It's just, there you go. Go and do something with this. And I think that approach is going to be great for our network out there in education who have had a really challenging year and a half where the ground has shifted under them completely. It's disorienting. People are, you know, some people are burning out, you could say, overworked. It's overwhelming, the level of change, and not just in practice, but in the sector and that they work in as well. Everything has changed in the last year and a half. So that's where I would like to start off, is just thinking about those people right now that are, you know, they're on holiday. They've had an amazingly challenging time. And the first thing that we're hearing from a lot of our colleagues is how difficult they find it to let go, to disconnect and give themselves permission to simply be on holiday and give themselves that mental space. I mean, what do you think's happening there? I mean, why is that such a common thing? We hear it from so many people.
Wow, that's a really big question. But first of all, I wanted to thank you for such a lovely review of my book, which is very kind of you. I am definitely passionate about sharing everything I know with other people. Some of the listeners might be wondering why you're talking to a psychotherapist, but my approach to psychotherapy is not about mental health only. It's about growth and development, which applies pretty much everywhere in life. So the principles and the lessons that we have learned in my profession in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so, and the practice that we can do now is valuable to everyone, because everyone has a mental health to deal with. Everyone is a person. I'm very passionate about taking the mystique and mystery out of what I do. I know that a lot of people are there's just the idea of you talking to a psychotherapist might be a little bit intimidating, especially for people who are, because of the changes that you described, might be finding themselves struggling with some anxiety or some difficulties or some despair. They could end up thinking they have mental health problems. So now you're talking to a psychotherapist, it could be very intimidating. But I'm really hoping that by the end of our talk today, some of that will be taken away. So partly to respond to your question, we need to go right to the beginning of the fact that we're not actually particularly well made, as you probably know from my talks and from reading my book. We are the proud owners of two brains that are not particularly well connected. We have a very, very ancient mammal limbic brain in the center of our brain, which is 200 million years old and is fear-based. And its purpose is to basically help us survive as a species, which means that for each one of us, there's a powerful survival instinct, because that supports the survival of an entire species. If everyone is concerned about their own survival, obviously a species would do really, really well. Part of that means that change is suspicious. When we're used to something being a certain way, we're used to our reality, we're used to what we're doing, we're used to our place in the world, our sense of who we are, what we do, our roles, the people we interact with, the requirements, the commitments, we have everything that is involved, the physical reality of our lives. That is perceived by our limbic brain to be what we see as safe. It doesn't matter if there are things about it that are not great, and we're all complaining maybe about things not going right here or there or the other way or somewhere else in our reality, but we perceive the familiar reality as safe. So the moment you introduce a comprehensive, massive change, which is an assault effectively on our reality, on what our brain is wired to recognize as safe, we don't feel safe anymore. I've written another little book called Grief and Adjustment to Change. I don't know if you've read it. It's a tiny little booklet.
I've seen
and
this,
I'm explaining exactly that. As soon as there is a massive change, our limbic brain needs to begin to adjust to it in order for us to feel safe again. What happened with the past year and a half or so is that the change was continuous. It wasn't solid. It's not like something happened, there's been a big change, but that's it, it stopped, and now we can begin to stop and adjust to a new reality. The change was progressive and fluid, and even now it's not yet finished. We don't even know what situation we're going to be in. That makes it really, really difficult for the limbic brain to cope with. So anybody who feels disoriented needs to understand that it's not their fault, it's just how we're made. We're made to be suspicious of anything that isn't familiar to us. This is evolution playing a part. The topic of the book that you highlighted is about integrating the limbic brain with the prefrontal cortex, because one of the things that's been discovered is that they're not actually well integrated. And if people want to, if I quickly explain how we know this, or how people can confirm that in their own experience, is to think of an experience that people have had where they've been triggered emotionally into feeling maybe unsafe or uncomfortable or threatened in some way. And at that moment, they lost it. So either they got very angry, or they got very depressed, or they got very confused. And the point is, they can't think, they lose themselves, they feel like a child, they don't feel like an adult with agency or certainty anymore, despite the fact that they might have all the qualifications and experience to fulfill whatever role they fulfill. The moment we're triggered, if our level of integration is not good, the limbic brain will take over and will make us feel like this frightened little mammal that the limbic brain really is. So when this big change has been happening in people's work, and I have encountered a lot of, for example, teachers who have been seeing me for therapy for various reasons, and they've definitely talked about that. As soon as that change happens, the people who are going to be most affected by it are people whose limbic brain tends to take over more, which means the level of integration can probably be better. So the aim for us to, in therapy, for example, is to integrate better so that the limbic brain doesn't take over anymore. It doesn't mean that we won't react to change. It doesn't mean that we won't be uncomfortable with it. But what it does mean is that we won't be lost in that feeling anymore. We'll be able to think from here, this is the executive here, and we will be able to think more clearly. We'll still stay grounded, we'll still maintain our sense of identity and who we are, and some clarity of thinking and planning and decision-making, even when there is a big change, which is a big assault on the limbic brain. So depending on where people's development is, they'll be affected in a different way.
So it's not like we're trying to sort of hijack the limbic. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it leads on to got a number of different pathways, but if I understand, I mean, so the change is not bad. Change is always going to be uncomfortable. It's just we can improve or adapt the way that we respond to it, respond rather than react, because it's a bit more conscious, isn't it? But so it's, if I understand, it's not like we're trying to sort of hijack the limbic system, because we do need that to keep us alive, and it has its uses and things like that. So we're
What do you mean
still,
hijack? Sorry, Mark.
when
When you say hijack?
like people talk about, for example, there's climbers that have been said to have been able to hijack the amygdala, for example, to bypass the fear reaction. And if I understand, what you said there was quite crucial, that change will still be uncomfortable. It's not like we're trying to get rid of the feeling of discomfort. It's just that we're trying to not let it completely take over and give us a response mechanism or a response approach that we
That's
can
right.
still maintain agency, clarity, and decision-making capacity in difficult
That's right.
situations. Yeah.
So what you're kind of leading me to is to think about how people see emotions, for example. So people see emotions as the problem. If they feel uncomfortable, they think that's the problem. In fact, what the limbic brain does, it's a reactive brain. Its job is to look at, use the five senses to look at the reality we're in and observe and notice maybe there's a tiger behind that hill that I need to watch out for, and let me know that. But who is it letting know what? So if the connections are not sufficiently developed, and which is the case for most people, for most of us, then this goes out of commission temporarily, which means I am completely at the mercy of my fear, and I'm not going to be able to make conscious decisions. I'm not going to see options. I'm going to see fight, flight, freeze. That's it, done. I'm trapped. The feeling, oh, there's nothing I can do. I'm stuck. There's either this or that option. That's a very much a limbic kind of reaction. It's really important for me to emphasize to people that their feelings aren't the problem. What the problem is could be what the feelings are telling them. Now, the feelings might be telling you that there possibly is a tiger behind that hill. Is there a tiger behind that hill, or is the limbic brain just thinking there might be a tiger behind that hill because sometime in the past there was one, and then he thinks there might be one because here's a hill and I can't see behind it, and in the past there was a tiger and I got into trouble, so will there be one that I should worry about? This is the limbic brain's job. It's the intel officer in the brain. Problem is people they don't know what to do with their emotions, because it's usually the limbic brain that has to deal with them on its own, because this is not connected enough. And so it does everything it can, like any child would do, to try and cope with these emotions by any means possible. Distract yourself, push them away, ignore them, dismiss them, think them away. It doesn't work. It only makes the limbic brain more anxious because it thinks it hasn't transmitted the information about the potential danger. The limbic brain is simply an intel officer, and emotions are just information. There's nothing airy-fairy or weird about them. But society's attitude to emotion is so misinformed that that's a lot of the time, that's where people get into trouble. People, for example, come to therapy not because of what they feel, but because they're worried about what they feel.
Well, you're almost alluding to
Is
cognitive behavioral therapy. I imagine that's not your favorite thing then.
Not at all. I'm actually very concerned about it.
Suppresses emotions, doesn't it? It teaches you that
Correct.
you need to almost secrete them away rather than. But what you're talking about is acknowledging them, but working on what they tell you.
Yeah, and for that you need this bit of the brain. So there are things we need to do in order to increase our capacity to access this the moment we're triggered. Yeah. That's actually what we're doing in therapy. It's not really that complicated. It's not easy necessarily to do, depending on what people have got wired in there and what past they have or what history they have. But the reason I oppose to cognitive behavior therapy very strongly is because it sends the message that the bad feelings, the uncomfortable feelings, are the problem. And so what it does, it teaches people how to think their feelings away as if they haven't already been trying to do that anyway.
Yeah.
The problem is it leads to no integration. It leads to nothing at all. It leads to no growth. Cognitive behavior therapy is really by its own definition is intended for symptom reduction or for symptom management. That the way that I look at mental health is from a humanistic and existential perspective, which is that we have good mental health and are living well within ourselves if we are allowed to continue to grow and develop as a person towards our potential. If we're stopped, if something is stopping us, we don't do so well.
Yeah.
This is where psychological difficulties come from. But to go back to the question about change, it is objectively difficult. It's not people being weak or silly or stupid or not thinking about it right or missing something or not being strong enough, or resilient. It's none of that. It's absolutely normal to feel uncomfortable with change. Mm-hmm. It's all mammals feel that way. If anybody in your audience has ever moved house with a cat, they would know what that feels like to the cat. Oh, well, there you go. So you know how the cats do not feel themselves or comfortable until they've sniffed absolutely every single nook and cranny in the new house. And only then, after a few days of doing that, they begin to relax and be themselves again and then do whatever it is they do. The reason they sniff everywhere and go and watch everywhere, because this is how they're wiring the new reality into their limbic brain.
Yeah.
Humans have forgotten that we have these natural instincts to do that. But if you move to a new house and the house is a finite, it's finished, it's done, the cat has something to adjust to. If you keep moving, if you keep changing, every 2 days, every 3 days, you keep moving, the cat doesn't know what to adjust to. And this is kind of what happened to people. And it's not just teachers or educators who are suffering from the impact of what's been happening. It's because it's been chaotic, frankly, and it's been fluid. It's been an evolving situation rather than a finite change that we can adjust to.
Well, this is exactly the point, and I think this is quite an interesting one, because if I understand, so your analogy with the cat, you're talking about the episodic change. Something happens and then we deal with it. The cat sniffs out every part of the house and gets used to it, rewires the limbic brain, and then that then replaces the sense of the familiar, and there's a new familiar in which it can feel comfortable. But that obviously doesn't sort of work very well in the situation in which we find ourselves now. And probably now in education, we're talking a lot about VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world. We're talking about, education, preparing learners for that, for what the Buddhists would say, that the only constant is change. It's the only thing on which we can actually depend on is something discontinuous. In that sense, I mean, what can people do if they're going to be completely in new situations all the time and they want to learn to be as adaptable as possible? Now, I understand on one hand, you're talking about integration of the prefrontal cortex in the limbic brain, but you also you alluded to what people might have in their past as well. And I think that might sort of muddy the waters for some people, because on one hand, there's this practical, I can focus on greater integration between the PFC and the limbic brain to help this.
Which everybody should do.
But then there's when people start talking about, but I am defined by past experiences and therefore can't change. I mean, I think I told you I've been reading a bit about Adlerian psychology recently.
Absolutely.
And what he says about, that it's a choice. You cannot possibly be defined by your past. There's no Freudians in here, I wonder where you stand on that. I mean, what do people, is that a kind of get out clause when people are saying, I can't because of my past experiences are defining me?
No. First of all, I suspect, and I have a lot of clinical experience to back it up. By the way, you have to understand, in private practice, I don't have a choice of being a bad therapist. If I were a bad therapist and my work didn't work, I wouldn't get work. I've been doing, I've worked exclusively in private practice for 22 years, and I'm able to make a living out of it, which means that I have a regular client base that come in, and there's no problem with that. So no one who provides a private service as a consultant would do well at all if what they provide is not helpful. So that's one thing I wanted to say. So what I'm trying to say is that if it was not possible to change, there would be no point in therapy at all. Does that make
Right.
sense? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So here's the thing. When we begin to integrate vertically, vertical integration is integrating the prefrontal cortex with the limbic brain better. And that's initially in therapy a very straightforward process where we simply begin to breathe a bit deeper. Anybody who's done breathing practices in yoga or in meditation, this is all really useful because it gives you immediate access to that. Studies are proving that. There's no, I mean, I don't want to go into that, but it's pretty clear. So if you breathe a bit deeply, you notice your emotions, you begin to acknowledge them and validate them. You begin to create connections between the two brains. That leads to actual physical connectivity between the two brains. At some point in time, as people begin to develop that kind of new infrastructure in the brain, they begin to change themselves. They begin to notice that their triggers are fewer, that they're shorter in duration. Sometimes they might still get triggered by something pretty big, but they never leave the adult, so to speak, in the brain. The executive remains, so they're fully aware of what they're doing. They're fully aware of what's going on, and they can also choose their reactions in the moment to other people or to themselves. But after people who have a big past and maybe not so favorable, there will be a point after they've achieved sufficient vertical integration where horizontal integration will begin. That is what is called in everyday pop psychology healing, making sense of things, achieving closure, looking at things from a different perspective, remembering things with a different attitude to them. All of these things that people are trying to achieve will begin to happen naturally from right to left of the brain after there's been enough of the vertical integration. So my suggestion to everybody is to begin with the vertical integration and then see what happens. The majority of people, I would say, and that's again, that's based on, this is why I prefaced it by saying I've got 22 years experience as a practitioner. I would say the majority of the population are perfectly capable of integrating their brains and therefore also integrating horizontally and making sure that the past no longer dominates them. So the past can make us feel like it defines us because, for example, if I have something wired into me from the way I was treated by my father or my mother or somewhere at school or something like that, and it's wired in, every time something that looks remotely similar triggers that particular circuitry, I'm going to be back in that circuitry effectively, and I will be thinking and feeling and seeing reality from within it. So everything will look the same to me as the past, and I will react the same way, so I'm the same person. When we begin to integrate, we change. It doesn't mean I'm not me. It just means that I am no longer defined by the things that have happened to me.
Right. Yeah.
Having a past, everybody has a past. Having a past doesn't mean that's not forever. You don't have to stay the same way. The only people who genuinely cannot change are people who have some kind of degenerative brain illness that prevents them from learning or changing in general anymore. People who perhaps have unfortunately damaged their brain with drugs or very long alcohol use or something like that. These people might have compromised neuroplasticity where we really want it to be, and it just doesn't work. And these people will find it difficult to change in every possible way. They'll find it possible to learn, difficult to learn anything, not just to change in therapy or in their psychology. So no, we do not have to be defined by the past at all. But it doesn't happen by itself. And just understanding your past. So you mentioned psychoanalysis. In psychodynamic therapy, by the way, I am trained as a in psychodynamic therapy and in CBT as well. We all had to learn all of it. Psychodynamic psychotherapy holds that if you understand how things came to be, how you came to be the way you are, why you react the way you do, you'll be cured. It doesn't actually quite work that way. Without the neurological changes, understanding alone doesn't change you. So it's good to understand, it's good to know, it's good to be aware, but you don't necessarily just change from that. So a lot of people who've been through psychoanalysis say, well, I understand a great deal about myself, but I'm still finding myself reacting the same way. What can we do about it?
Yeah.
The missing piece is the integration that needs to happen.
Right.
The vertical integration work, the prefrontal with the limbic brain, creates the foundation or the infrastructure necessary for the right to left. to happen by itself. It's not something you can force. It's something that you need to wait until it begins to happen by itself. That way, therapy, for example, can be very, very safe to do, and you don't re-traumatize people. If somebody has trauma, you don't push them. They begin to do this work vertically, and then the horizontal begins to work. And then it's tough, yes, but I'm there and I'm trained and I know how to be with people and support that process. But they're not going to be re-traumatized by it. You see, all these things, we're talking brains, we're talking connections. I'm trying to take the mystique out of all of this scary stuff to do with mental health and with psychotherapy. And I think you're trying to help me do that in our conversation.
No, absolutely. I mean, if we kind of step into the shoes of somebody who's listening to this now, say somebody working in student recruitment. Okay, so their job is to find students for universities. Now, this year, the way they recruit is different because, visas are a problem, travel's a problem, classes have shifted online, artificial intelligence and aggregators and digital platforms and all this kind of stuff are supplanting parts of their traditional role. And so the role they saw themselves as has shifted. And as you perfectly expressed earlier, that things are still changing. So all of that, all these layers of security and familiarity have dissipated. And they are perhaps not willing or not predisposed to seeking external help in terms of psychotherapy, for example. But what you're talking about vertical integration may appeal to them. But I think an important thing here is how do they do that? For these people that are out there, they're experiencing fear, obviously, and they're experiencing great discomfort, as you're perfectly explaining. It's a limbic system reaction. The prefrontal cortex is not yet able, we're not able to connect it and use that as we were saying earlier, the adult in the room, to kind of soothe the limbic system and be aware, but at least manage the response. But how do people practically on their own begin the integration between those two brains? I mean, what kind of things can they do?
Before I say that, there's just one little missing piece that occurred to me that I needed to add. And that's because you've spoken about the kind of new technologies that people are now exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert to be able to say whether they're good or not good, or whether we should do something about them, or whether they're desirable or not desirable. It's not my area. But I can tell you that when the limbic brain is in charge in most people's lives, the more advanced the technology becomes that we're required to engage with, the more out of depth our limbic brain actually feels. The limbic brain is not designed to manage an adult life in an increasingly complex world. What's happened in the last 100 years, and increasingly the last few decades, in yours and my lifetime, is an absolute explosion in technological advancement, which means that we are now interacting with things that when I was a child were only science fiction. The idea that I could have a telephone call with seeing somebody like I do with you now. I remember joking with my friends when I was 11, thinking, wouldn't that be amazing if we could do that? And we are doing that. Now, there are great advantages to some of this technology. Like I said, I'm not a technologist and it's not for me to comment too much on it, but we need to understand that the reason we have a pandemic of anxiety in the world is because anxiety is basically fear, is because the more the technology advances, the more complex the world becomes, the more the limbic brain feels out of its depth. So if somebody has a limbic brain that's more dominant in their life, they're likely to feel increasingly scared and uncomfortable, and even quite despairing, actually, when they're required to interact with technologies that are frankly baffling to the limbic brain. In one of my slides, I don't know if I had it when you attended my talk, I have a little cartoon of a caveman wearing, I don't know, rabbit skins, with the hair and hairy legs and all, holding a mobile phone like that, like it's an old mobile phone with the antenna, looking at it like that. No, what is that? And that was just to illustrate the fact that the limbic brain is completely ill-equipped to manage an adult life with all its responsibilities in a complex world. What happens to people as they grow older and their levels of responsibility increase? And there's no wonder you begin to see massive increase in mental health crisis in people when they shift to university, for example, or when they are in their 20s, is because all of a sudden they're not children anymore. The familiar structures around them are no longer there, like schools, like first primary school, secondary school, there's home, there's family, that's all going, and they're required to be adults and manage in increasingly with increasing levels of complexity, manage complex tasks, be responsible, and do lots of things that are really, frankly, quite overwhelming to the limbic brain. So the point is, the less integration we have and the more the limbic brain is in charge, the more we will experience new technologies as overwhelming. I don't think this is going to get any better. I think it's going to get worse because technology is not stopping.
Yeah.
The advancements are there. I mean, I think people are talking, I read a little bit around that, and I think that they're talking about we're on a cusp of just about another massive technological shift. So that is going to be devastating to a lot of people's limbic brain. It's not even the change, it's the fact that it really cannot handle that level of complexity. Yeah. Think of it as the brain of a chimpanzee that's designed, knows what it's doing. It's designed to find food, mate, groom, bond with others, play, be creative, invent things at the rudimentary level, but mainly to survive. We don't even know what the dangers are in the world, that the limbic brain looks outside the window and doesn't recognize what it sees anymore.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So unless
Absolutely.
we're integrated, we're toast, basically. It's not going to get any better. So I wanted to address that because part of the issue here is not just the change, it's the fact that the change is in a particular direction, which is, it means that the technologies people are required to interact with or somehow work with or something, some of them are even being replaced by technology, are beyond the capacity of the limbic brain to cope with. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just biology. It's just how it is. This, on the other hand, can handle anything.
Yeah.
Massive. It's a bit of a mystery too. I'm not going to get into that now. But so integration, how do we achieve integration? At a very basic level, people really need to be able to simply breathe a little bit deeper. This is just me giving the absolute rudimentary basics, right? So take a deep breath to activate this, and it'll always do that. And then observe yourself, observe your feelings. What do you feel? And so some people, feelings are not clear at all. So some people are more physically oriented. They know what their body's doing before they know what their feelings are doing, or they might be visual. They might get kind of visual images instead of I feel such and such. All of this is information from the limbic brain, and all of this is worth listening to. So if I suddenly feel a discomfort in my guts, that's all I'm feeling. I don't know what I'm feeling, but I'm feeling a discomfort in my guts. That's a signal from my limbic brain that it feels something. The educated guess it's something to do with fear, but we don't know for sure. Something in the guts. So the practice is take a deep breath and imagine that you're, like you said before, that was a really nice analogy. You're the adult now. You're looking at a child who has a tummy ache. You don't know why the tummy ache is. The child's too small to tell you what they feel. So what you need to say to them simply, it's okay to feel like this. If something needs to be done, I mean, if you really think you've got some problem in your guts and you need to do something about it, and go do something about it. But if we're just thinking of it as an expression of an emotion, then the prefrontal cortex job is simply to acknowledge it. I call it validating it.
Right.
Now, what does the validation do? What does this acknowledgement do? This acknowledgement means that we're beginning to create a steady and uninterrupted flow of information between the old mammal brain, the limbic brain, and the prefrontal cortex. And it's that flow, when we begin to enable it from the prefrontal cortex towards the limbic brain, we're saying, hey, tell me everything. I'm going to listen. I want to hear everything you have to tell me. I don't know what you're telling me yet. I don't understand it yet, but that's okay. I don't have to. Just tell me everything. I'm here. I'm hearing you. That in itself creates integrative fibers between the two brains, and that begins to change us. There is no change in us without physiological change in the brain, in the connectivity of the brain. It's called brain architecture. Without change in the brain, there is no change. Just like there's no learning in anything without physiological changes in the brain. If I learn a language, I create neural pathways and neural networks that contain that language skills. Something has to happen. Therapy is the same. So it's very rudimentary. It's very basic, I know. Did you actually want me to go through the whole exercise, or did you just want to just quickly kind of give a, like I did?
Well, we could take that part first, because it sounds to me, it's almost like, okay, so it sounds like mindfulness in a way, in terms of that, the metacognition of being aware of your feelings. I mean, although mindfulness does extend into other things, it's about being aware of what you see as well. You know, it's aware of different things. It's perhaps a broader concept, but
mindfulness is, anybody who studied mindfulness practices would know, and the more traumatized they are, the more they would know they can't actually do it. The problem with mindfulness is that if it works, it gives you access to your prefrontal cortex, but it doesn't teach you how to integrate the brains.
Right.
But anybody who's done mindfulness and has some idea and has some principles and some skills there, brilliant. I love it. All my clients who've done something like that, I piggyback on it straight away. I said, well, then you know how to access your prefrontal cortex. Now let's train the prefrontal cortex to talk to your limbic brain.
I see.
So mindfulness, okay. The outside awareness is definitely there, because as soon as you access this, you get this much more crisp out awareness of the outside. But what we want is to harness the capacity of the prefrontal cortex to be aware of the inside as well. So it's not that we're ignoring the outside, it's that if we want to integrate, the outside is not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on talking to our limbic brain and addressing or receiving the information it gives us. Mindfulness doesn't teach people specifically to do integration. That's the only gripe I have with it. And well, actually, I've got another one, which is that for a lot of people, when they try to do mindfulness, there's something else happening that some of your listeners will probably recognize, which is that the limbic brain thinks you're trying to relax it. Now, imagine that the limbic brain thinks there's a bear in front of me.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a bear and I'm petrified out of my wits. And then you come along to me and say, Abigail, no, that's not a real bear. It's just a poster of a bear. My limbic brain is in full flight. It's full fight, flight, freeze, whatever, but I didn't mean flight I meant loosely. So it's fully triggered. There's a bear. I'm completely terrified now. And I don't know what to do. I need to do something. I need to survive it. You come in and say, don't worry about it. This is just a cardboard cutout. This is just a poster. How do you think I'm going to react to you in that moment from my limbic brain?
Rejection, surely. No.
Not only rejection, I'm going to get angry with you because right now you're adding to my danger. Right. You're not only not helping me survive the bear, you're trying to trick me to think that the bear isn't real. That's what my limbic brain is thinking. I know the bear is real. You're not going to tell me it's not real. Doesn't matter if it really is real or not. My limbic brain thinks it's real, therefore it's real. Yeah. So in mindfulness, the problem has been with it that it's been used, for example, with extremely traumatized people. I have severe objection to using it, for example, with veterans, war veterans, where some of them can be very, very seriously traumatized. If the limbic brain so much as thinks that you're trying to relax it, it's going to flip. It's going to just go completely the opposite. It's going to try and stop you. That's why a lot of people have been having a terrible time trying to do mindfulness. And I know people don't say that out loud or from the top of the, because it's not, you're supposed to say that it's okay, that it works for you, that it's nice. But the truth is it doesn't work. What we are doing is we're not trying to relax the limbic brain. As soon as I start to do the exercises with my clients for vertical integration, I notice immediately when the limbic brain reacts straight away. And I then say, it's okay to feel like this. We're not actually trying to relax you. So we acknowledge that too. Yeah. Yeah. The purpose of vertical integration is not short-term gain. It's not to change how we feel or to make us feel better or to make the feelings go away. The purpose of this work is to achieve long-term change in ourselves, which is about changing the architecture of the brain. People who don't have a very complicated childhood, that said they don't have childhood trauma, achieve this a lot faster than people with trauma. Yes, that's true. But, you know, that's why I wrote the book. I thought that at least for a big section of the population, it should be possible to do this work even without a therapist. The section of the population that suffer from trauma might want to still talk to somebody and see somebody, but with the full understanding of what they're supposed to be doing in therapy. That's why I wanted to write this down. So mindfulness is useful if you have some skills that enable you to access this through meditation, through relaxation, through just breath. Frankly, just any ordinary breath will do. But whatever skills people have that's useful, but they're not intended to relax the limbic brain, and they're not for short-term gain. The problem I've had with mindfulness, it's been used as almost like a relaxation technique. It's been used as basically symptom management. And it's symptom management is rubbish, because once you manage symptoms, yeah, okay, you'll feel better for a little bit. And then what? What happens tomorrow? What happens next week?
Yeah.
So the real issue needs to be dealt with. And the real issue is actually the fact that our brains are not particularly integrated. And that's everybody. It's just how humanity is, just what we are. It's kind of bizarre. My counseling or my psychotherapy practice is called Fully Human Psychotherapy. And I came up with this name in 1997 when I was still a beginner at the psychotherapy degree that I was doing. Little did I know how relevant it would be, because being fully human means we don't reject the limbic brain. We don't poo-poo this either, which can be a bit more inclusive and a bit more spiritual and compassionate and empathetic, which some limbic people might think that's a weakness, right?
Yeah.
So we don't poo-poo either of them. We have both. The problem is that they're not working together very well. They're not integrated, so we're clunky. We're really, really clunky. If the reptilian brain, up the back of the brain, and the limbic brain didn't work well together, we would be physically disabled.
Yeah.
When the limbic brain and the prefrontal cortex are not connected together, what we suffer is in our psychology, mostly.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So these two, the back of the brain, the reptilian brain right at the bottom, which is the brainstem. To be honest with you, I lost my brain actually here. Oh, here we go. I've got a brain model here, but I can't find the right half of it. Sorry, the brain is somewhere lost. My brain's lost. The point is this. We're talking about the limbic brain and the reptilian brain in the back, the brainstem, working together for hundreds of millions of years. So they're very well integrated.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why the body pretty much works fine. You breathe, you digest, your blood pressure works, things work. The limbic brain and the prefrontal not so, and that's why psychology is what suffers most. Of course, it affects our physical well-being as well. It's not complicated, it's just a big topic in its own right, but generally speaking, it's our psychology that suffers from that. So breathe and validate all of your feelings, basically. Everything you feel, whichever way that information comes to you, you tell yourself it's okay to feel it. And I particularly encourage people, if they work with children or young people, if they don't believe me that this works, because why would you believe just one person you've never met before? And especially a psychotherapist, we're suspects, aren't we? The best thing to do is to actually start to practice it with children and young people. And if any of your, the members of your audience and the people in education that you're working with have access to young people, that is fantastic. Or if they have their own children or grandchildren or any contact you have with young people. The moment children communicate all the time and learn all the time. This is what they do. And because they're mostly limbic up to about 15, they tend to be out with their emotions one way or the other. So somehow they communicate how they feel. They might not be able to say, right now I'm feeling quite sad, but they will show that they're sad, or they show that they're scared, or they show that they're angry. If adults could just take a deep breath and at that moment tell the child, you know what, it's okay to feel like this. I'm here, everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
When you see how that works with young people, you'd believe me. That's what I tell people. So when clients struggle with it at first, I say to them, start with your children.
Yeah.
And they do, and it works, and then they believe me. Because why would you believe a therapist anyway? I'm not expecting people to just believe me. I want them to actually experience it themselves and then decide whether that makes sense to them or not. I can tell you that's true, but We learn experientially. We learn from doing, not from listening, not from hearing somebody else say something.
Well, I mean, I can say, you know, as personally, that from the time that I saw your talk and really started to properly learn about the integration of these two brains, like I mentioned to you, that, you know, it's something I've certainly practiced. I mean, we bring it into education quite a lot in terms of metacognition, about being aware of how you learn and things like that. So that's certainly prefrontal cortex. But in terms of the integration, I found that simple practice of, I mean, I've said to you before, I visualize the prefrontal cortex, which I feel like is kind of facing out in the world. It's facing out into, this is where I'm going. This is who I want to be. It's all the exciting things out there. And it almost has to kind of take stock of this backseat driver in a way and say, hang on, and turn around. And this is what I always visualize, it turning around and soothing the limbic brain, not patronizing, but just acknowledging and taking time to almost sit with the experience of the emotion. And as you correctly predicted, when I said this to you earlier, you said, and I imagine you've seen changes in the way that you respond to things. And I absolutely have, you know.
So think of it this way. We have these two brains. They're not really compatible. Their agendas are quite different. The limbic brain's agenda is let's stay alive at all costs, no matter what. Survival is the most important thing. Living is not dying. The prefrontal cortex, you talked about it, that's looking forward. That's the part of us that says life has to mean something. For humans, it's a massive problem. We stopped being mammals 35,000 years ago when we got this. Because this says suddenly, actually, it doesn't really matter how long I live. What matters is that I live well, that I am fulfilled, that I have a purpose for my life. The limbic brain knows exactly what its purpose is. Keep me alive and keep my children alive and keep everybody that I care of alive, and nothing else matters. Live as long as possible. So what we're doing when we're integrating is we're making sure, and Dr. Dan Siegel is worth a mention here because he's the developer of interpersonal neurobiology, which is the framework that brought all this knowledge to my field. And he's also obviously, he knows that this has significant implications to education and to parenting. Dan Siegel explains, and he goes to the complex science of it, when the brains are better integrated, they are both remaining exactly the way they are. They don't change. People don't grow up.
Yeah.
They're just integrated. What that means is that each of the brains does exactly the task it's supposed to be doing, but they're doing it efficiently and in communication with each other. And there's no inner fighting. This is, people are looking for inner peace. That's where you get inner peace from. So what does that mean? That means that my limbic brain functions perfectly well as my intel officer. I'm sorry, I used to be military, so I use sometimes military terminology, which I'm not keen on, but I still do use that. It's the intel officer, it's my crew. It tells me what's going on. It tells me, it watches, and it tells me if I should worry. But what it does is, look, I'm thinking there might be danger over there. I'm just passing that to you. And then it relaxes back to its normal state. And this then has to take down information and process. This is a fabulous, there's no computer in the world. There is no AI system in the world that compares with the processing power of this. Nothing. And I suspect they will never be able to develop anything like that, because this also regulates what we call consciousness, which is a whole big topic. What is consciousness? But that's the bit that gives us the sense of connectedness to something bigger than ourselves. If you think of your own, maybe whatever spiritual practice you have or whatever perspective you have on life, it doesn't have to be a religion, but the sense of something bigger than ourselves, the sense of something beyond us, or something that transcends us. This gives us the solid sense of identity and uniqueness. This is where I know who I really am, and I'm staying consistent across situations. The limbic brain is not quite like that, because the limbic brain is motivated by survival. So whichever group I'm in, if I'm limbic, I will try to fit in, because I want everybody to like me. If I sit in the cave with my people and they don't like me, they'll toss me out and I die in the ice age. We did not survive from these people. We survived from those who, we are the descendants of those who were acceptable to their peers, right? So in the limbic brain, we have an imperative to be acceptable to everybody. Otherwise, we risk rejection. Rejection is death. So the limbic brain is not a good manager of our lives, right? But it's a very, very good intel officer. It can tell me if I should worry about something. That's all it does. And it works better and more efficiently and more effectively when it is allowed to do what it's supposed to be doing, but it's not asked also to be in charge.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense? And we put in charge. This is called the executive brain for a reason. It really is the executive in the brain. By the way, it does everything else. It actually already does process all the information coming from the whole, actually from the whole nervous system, but from the bottom up, this already does it. The only thing it doesn't do well is the connection with the limbic brain, because it's not, we're not born with it.
Yeah.
It's something that parents can help children develop from a young age. And this is where I get to, I want to be redundant, because if every parent did that with their children from the moment they were born, we're gonna raise human Mark II. This is what I'm thinking. Yeah.
The fascinating thing about all of this is the sense of empowerment, isn't it? That it gives you with
Absolutely.
We're living in a really interesting time where, so I mean, if you are, for example, a person that has grown up thinking that things like meditation practice is a form of Eastern spirituality that has no place in my kind of life, you know, that kind of thing. But the practicality of neuroscience, with the evidence to back it up, is at such a stage right now where it's so useful to be able to speak to people about this and actually almost bring in these things that previously were over here, and to see the connections. Because, you know, we've seen the neuroimaging studies on people who are meditating and seeing this part just light up. Which is absolutely incredible. And suddenly these things that were considered spiritual are actually can come into the practical for people who feel more secure thinking that way. And I think it's tremendously empowering, so that people that are right now experiencing tremendous change and feeling uncomfortable and feeling lost and feeling like they want to withdraw almost because they just don't recognize things anymore. Sorry?
That's the limbic reaction. That's the fleeing reaction or freezing reaction.
But it gives them something they can do about it, doesn't it? It gives them, well, first of all, a way to explain it. Yeah. But I think, you know, being able to explain it to yourself, and it's part of being okay with it, isn't it? To say, well, it's like you've repeated, I think 3 or 4 times today, and I don't think accidentally, it's not your fault. It's the way we're designed. And I think that is a very positive message for people.
So you know how, you probably guess, or maybe you know how psychotherapy is a very scary word for a lot of people. So when you talk about empowerment, that's actually a very important point for me, because one of the complaints I have against my profession is that it's been so mysterious and full of mystique and airy-fairiness that people had no idea what they were doing. So you go to a therapist and you talk to a therapist, then what happens? You don't know. The therapist is the custodian of some amazing wisdom that you hope that they have. And you hope that somehow through talking to that nice person who obviously cares, something's going to happen in your life. But of course, the traditional therapies don't work, because an adult cannot change the brain connectivity of another adult. Therapists can provide, like educators, therapists are facilitators. We can provide the environment and the information that people need in order to begin to change. So in the first session, when I see every client, I teach them all of that straight away. What then happens is that instead of me being the expert who's somehow going to do something magical for them to feel better, we are working together. We become a team. I'm the facilitator to support their process, but they're doing all the work. But because they're doing all the work with the full understanding of what they're doing, like you said, suddenly there's no mystery in anything anymore. It's grounded, and there's dignity in it. It's empowering, it's dignity, and people are very much in charge of their own development instead of it being the therapist domain. We can't actually do that. There's nothing we can do to change adults' brains. I work with adults, I can't do that. So this business about empowerment is extremely important. There's no dignity in people coming to therapy feeling horrible, and they feel already like they're failures. They're ashamed because they think I failed, I can't manage my life. And then they don't realize it's not actually their fault. Once you teach them all of that, the whole thing turns around. Not only do they become empowered, they are fully in charge. And I'm talking in one session, people get the idea of it, they realize what we're doing, they understand what therapy is about, and all the shame about not performing, so to speak, has gone out of it. Because and the one thing I've read that's really important to say, and I say that to all my clients, your limbic brain is not in therapy.
Yeah.
Another problem I have with CBT is they're messing with the limbic brain. The limbic brain is not in therapy. It's in everybody out there. The limbic brain is working at full capacity, doing everything it can to help that individual survive with everything that's already wired in, the good and the bad. It's doing it the best it can. There is no more it can do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the limbic brain is not in therapy ever. It's suffered enough.
Yeah.
What's in therapy, if you want to call it therapy, is this. It's really training. It's this. The prefrontal cortex is who I'm addressing and who I am training to talk to the limbic brain the right way. When the limbic brain feels more supported, then we begin to right to left. So the limbic might start to tell you stuff. It might start to tell you, oh, do you remember when we were in year 5 and such happened and our friends did this and did that? And then you have these memories and then things begin to connect and then you're done. Basically, therapy has an end.
Wow. That's
I know.
quite fascinating. I mean, so I mean, as a kind of summary, I mean, if I'm sitting there thinking that I want to become more comfortable, not comfortable. I want to have a healthier response to change, more of an acceptance than a kind of, going into despondency and withdrawing and things like that. That what I need to do is to really start, well, first of all, understanding that it's not my fault. It's the way we're designed. Then to practice accessing the prefrontal cortex through simple things like breath work and meditation, just practicing being in there and practicing.
No. And validating all their feelings.
And
Without
validating.
that, there is no integration.
Right. So that creates the integration. So when I'm feeling something, it's to simply not try to get rid of the feeling or feel ashamed or suppress in any way, but to validate it.
There. If you feel that you're trying to make it go away, that means your limbic brain is still in charge.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because that's what the limbic brain does. That here will never try to make anybody's feelings go away. We are naturally empathetic here.
Mm-hmm.
It's given. It's not a taught thing. This is about a bit of a mystery. I can't get into that now, but it's there. So
even with ourselves, you're talking about empathy almost between two badly connected parts of our brain. Self-love,
loving kindness. Yes, do you remember that's why I called it the neuroscience of self-love, because essentially when you work from here, you're self-loving automatically.
Right.
The limbic brain, not necessarily, because it's suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not messing with the limbic brain. If people feel they go into despondency and all of that, they need to understand that is a normal limbic reaction to what is happening to them. Mm-hmm. The limbic brain is trying to tell them something. I'm struggling here. I can't do this. This is too much for me. I can't manage this. And the reason it can't manage is because it's not its remit. It's not what it's meant to do. You don't send a 15-year-old kid to do the job you're doing, do you? You'd never send a 10-year-old kid to I don't know, preside over a government department with I don't know, millions of pounds of budget. It's not possible.
Sometimes you do. Yeah.
No, let's not go there. But the point is, the more integrated we are, mm-hmm. the more we're not just managing our situation that we're in, whatever it is. We see it as an opportunity. We see creative ways to handle it, and we might even act to change it if it's not right. This is where real courage comes from as well. This is power. This is where real power comes from. The limbic brain doesn't have power. It might have aggression. If I'm already pushed to the wall, I might respond aggressively. This is the fight bit, but it's not power. Mm-hmm. When we're angry, we're already expressing powerlessness. This is real power.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Nobody can push you around when you're here.
So the problem, it seems, is when people define their sense of self from the limbic brain. Mm-hmm. You know, when they say
the world is limbic.
Yeah, that sounds. It is very. I think this is going to be a very familiar thing to people. So there's people out there who are, for example, being told that they are perfectly capable of a career change, or they have a lot to offer, or hey, why don't you try this? You're really good at X and Y. But they're experiencing the fear, of course, of change, of stepping out into the unknown. The brain wants familiarity and repeated patterns and all that kind of stuff to keep us safe. But instead of recognizing that as a natural limbic response, they're actually taking that as, this is me speaking, this is my inner voice and mischaracterizing themselves.
Right. Well, in other words, so this is really important that you brought that up, because I'm realizing I missed something here, which is when I meet clients, I'm giving example of clients because people usually come to therapy when they're really suffering, they're in a vulnerable state, there's a lot going on. They think that's all they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when people are activated from the limbic brain, working from the limbic brain, and most people actually do operate from the most advanced bit of their limbic brain that they can conjure up, which is usually a teenager, which is not very good, but they manage, but at a cost. But they think that's who they are. They don't realize there's more. Some people have an inkling about that. And some people would say to me, I can see that. I know there's something more to me, but I don't know how to get there. And when people are saying the example you gave, people say, oh, you can do so much more. Here's a career change. Here's an opportunity. The limbic brain is it's scared shitless. The limbic brain in anybody is not competent to run an adult life in a complex world. It's not its job. So the more advancement you asked it to do, the more it freaks out, basically.
Right.
Here, I know I can do what I can do. If I came to this conversation with you today, it's not possible for me anymore. I've been checking in with myself a lot. But if I come into this, or I come into a session, or I come into any response, so I do a lot of presentations, a lot of training. If I come into that from my limbic brain says, oh, I can't do this, I don't know anything. Well, that's really all scary. I mean, and it's quite right, because it's not its job. So while I'm sitting here with you, I'm talking to you and interacting with you from here. I'm feeling perfectly comfortable because I know my stuff. And I'm constantly checking in on my limbic brain and how it's feeling. And at the moment, my limbic brain is just playing Lego because it's pretty relaxed. But when people begin to do the integrative work, the only difference between me and other people or my clients is that I'm just been doing it for a bit longer, that's all. It's not, I'm not better, I'm not smarter, I'm not anything better than anybody. Just been doing it a little bit longer, that's all.
Yeah.
So if a person is, and what really people notice when you talk about people being offered career opportunities or advancements or change of some kind, they would often say to you, do you know, I'm petrified of this. I don't feel like I'm worthy, or I don't feel like I can do it. I don't feel like I can handle it. But there's another part of me that knows that I can, because I have that knowledge, I have that ability. But it's like two people in the one head, which really is what it is. It's two brains in the one head that I'm not talking. So if people are better integrated, they're able to address their challenges and whatever else from here. If you told me when I was, I don't know, 25, that I'd be sitting here today talking to you like this and explaining all of that, or that I will have had a career behind me of 22 years of psychotherapy, or that I've been writing books or doing training or standing in front of audiences and teaching stuff, I would have told you, you're mad, you're insane.
Yeah.
How can that's possible? I don't feel like I'm the kind of person who can do that. Something in me knew I had potential, but I didn't feel that. I felt I was very limbic, so I felt everything out of my limbic brain. The limbic brain is the feeling brain, essentially. So that was me. But we are not. So the point is, we're not just one thing. So even though the limbic brain might be very dominant, actually there is more to us than that. And that's a very important point for a lot of people to know. And people who are listening to you will have different varying levels of connectivity, and they will also have different kinds of history. So everybody's different, everybody's in a different place. Some people will recognize that. They will say, I was terrified when so-and-so suggested, the area manager suggested I might go for that position and apply for it because she thought I was very good at it. And I felt like, oh no, I can't possibly do that. But another part of me knew that bit that people say, oh, one part of me this and the other part of me that duality in us. That's the two brains. We are, in fact, this kind of dualistic kind of thinking is correct.
And what I want to ask you as well is that just, I guess we're sort of coming to the end of it as well, because it's now again on the practical side about, I mean, I have my own visualization where like I said, I imagine the PFC turning round and talking to the limbic brain. But now I've heard people, it's interesting you talk about the dialogue between the two brains, and you mentioned consciousness earlier, and makes me think of Eckhart Tolle saying that you're neither of those voices, you are the listener between the two, which is another level of thinking, isn't it? It's incredible. But the dialogue going on now, I've heard some people saying that they talk about, for example, your inner critic, which seems to me a bit of a clumsy way of looking at it, because you're almost externalizing that. And they actually, you know, I've heard of some sort of therapists and, you know, experts or pop psychologists, whatever, saying, give this inner critic a name, which is like, okay, that's Bob again telling me I can't go for the area manager's job. And after talking to you, I'm thinking that that's probably missing an opportunity, because you're almost on the right track. You're recognizing a duality, but what you're doing is you're giving it a name and an identity, whereas it's actually you. It's actually you. It's just another part of you that you need to accept.
I'm really glad you brought it up, because there's another word I don't like as well. Apart from inner critic, there's another one I hate, which is saboteur.
Right.
People need
Yeah.
to understand that every voice, I don't mean people hear voices, but you know what I mean. Every voice that speaks to them from their limbic brain, the scaredy one, the angry one, the arrogant one, the slightly narcissistic one that thinks they, you know, all of that. The one that criticizes the self, the one that is, I don't want to do this, and the one that procrastination is another word I don't like. All of these voices, none of them, and I mean absolutely none of them, are bad.
Yeah.
They were all created inside our head, and everybody's had the slightly different variations of these. They were all created in response to the environment that we've evolved in and that we've been living in. So the reason people would have an inner critic is two reasons. One, perhaps they were criticized a lot as a child. I was. So if I was criticized as a child, I grow up with, wired into my head is my mother's voice that tells me I'm useless, right? So I think I'm useless because that's what's wired in. Parents wire themselves into their children's brains. The other possibility for the inner critic is that if people operate more out of their teenager self, they will always be afraid that they will not be able to manage the task that's given to them. Real adolescents in the real world are always self-critical. This is completely authentic. But people need to remember, none of the voices that are in the limbic brain are their enemy. They're not an enemy to vanquish, no matter how vile, no matter how awful, no matter how angry, no matter how envious, no matter how jealous, no matter how uncharitable. None of them are the enemy. The limbic brain is there for one purpose only, is to keep us alive. The inner critic is the voice that tells me, be careful. You know, don't think you're too good at something, because then people will be very angry with you. If you don't fulfill the purpose, they might kill you. They might throw you out of that job and you'll starve. The saboteur, it could be a similar thing. The procrastinator is basically the little kid who's been asked to do something that is way beyond them. And it just doesn't want to do it because it's too much. The limbic brain is not the enemy. None of the bits in it are the enemy. They just need to be integrated. That's all.
Would you say that the inner child is a good metaphor in a way? Because I mean,
the inner child is not a metaphor. The inner child is a real thing. The inner child is all the versions of us from our development, and everybody's got different versions because depending on what happened to them. The inner children, or the inner characters inside of us, are basically clusters of neurons that remained unintegrated from different periods in our development. So if people are really honest with themselves and they look at how they felt the other day when the boss spoke to them and they burst into tears, and they reflect on how they actually felt, they'd remember, and they say, is this, and I ask, is this familiar? And they say, oh, I remember that. I remember feeling like that when I was 5, and every time my father said such and such to me, I felt really scared and sad or whatever. So the inner child, what people call the inner child, is actually a cluster of neurons that's unintegrated and is sitting in the right brain. So every time something similar triggers it, and it can be anything, it fires along the familiar patterns that it's wired to fire. And at that moment, that's all I am.
Well, the prefrontal cortex doesn't not fully develop until you're, what, 25? So there's... is that right?
Yeah, but it's pretty operational. I mean, we can see it even in younger people. I find it absolutely marvelous I don't work with young people, but very occasionally I got a chance to work with a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old, and their prefrontal cortex is fantastic. And you feel like you're talking with somebody who is a grown up.
Yeah. And I don't think it was always like this, because I don't think 16-year-olds today are like 16-year-olds when I was 16. Something's changed. You know, you hear these debates when they said, oh, 16-year-olds can vote in the Scottish independence election. And lots of people said, oh, 16-year-olds, blah, blah, blah.
It depends on the 16-year-old. It
Well,
really
yeah,
depends.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And
But
I don't know
I
how, I
think
can't remember how old
something
you
has
are now.
changed. Well, I'm in my 40s, and I mean, but I do think that perhaps it's in it, you know, there's greater consciousness in parenting of the impact we have on our children. There's a change in education and the role of the caregiver in education. Something has changed. I think that I see 16-year-olds a lot, you know, certainly enough to say that I think there's a change from a generation ago.
They were always amazing. The problem for adolescents is they're not brought up by integrated adults. So they're brought up by adults who are externally adults and have the authority of an adult, but in a brain, they're teenagers themselves. So why would a 15-year-old listen to a mother who feels to them like a 15-year-old? They don't know to say it. But then they fight against it. If the parent was in fact integrated and was a few steps ahead of that kid, the kid would love it. This is what children are looking for. This is what young people are looking for. They're looking for role models of how to become fully human. Do they get them? Not necessarily. And 50% of the kids, that's my estimation, are actually suffering from adverse childhood experiences. So they're actually abused or mistreated or neglected. And so they also grow up with trauma. By the time they're 15, they're full of trauma already. So I don't know that there's been a difference between, I don't think the human brain changed much in 35,000 years. And it's not just me saying it. There were 16-year-olds I'm 57 in September. There were 16-year-olds in my time and 16-year-olds in your time who were a full variety of possibilities. Some of them were amazing, some of them not so amazing, some of them grew a bit more later, some of them never did. I think it's the same for me. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you as in a sort of it's not that important, but I'm thinking my position is that really it all depends on what we're offering to young people, how they turn out. But I think if you really respect the fact that the person in front of you has a prefrontal cortex as well, you know your role as an adult, and you provide a role modeling yourself because you're better integrated than you were before. It's all going to go really well. I mean, it's really nice. And kids get angry because when they don't get, we pretty much get angry when we don't get what we need. So, you know, we don't just need to survive. Kids need to survive, obviously, but it's not enough. Humans need to develop to their potential. Without brain integration, none of us do well. I mean, the whole crux of what I'm doing is the recognition that anybody who's just living in a survival mode, in other words, they're driven by their limbic brain, is going to have mental health problems.
Right. Yeah.
It's going to be chronically anxious. It's going to be unhappy. It's going to be fighting with themselves. It's going to have a lot of difficulty with managing adult responsibilities and will just collapse under the pressure. So the key is that, and I didn't invent this. I mean, all I'm doing is putting it together in a way that I hope is accessible. And you confirmed to me that the way I write is probably achieving that. But the kudos and the credit goes to interpersonal neurobiology, to the absolutely revolutionary work of Dr. Dan Siegel. It's absolutely brilliant. Without him bringing that neuroscience into my profession, there'd be no change. So,
it's the same in education. It's added a revolutionary new layer. It really has. Just finally, for the people out there that want to, this will have sparked awareness, curiosity, recognition, realization, a range of responses in a lot of people. But for people that then now want to say, well, now what? I want to find out more about this. What would you suggest? You know, understanding, of course, that they might not be well versed in sort of texts of psychology and therapy and things like that, but just practical stuff they can go to. And I want to know more about this. I want to practice and develop this integration and see where it leads. What should they do? What sources of information?
Okay, this is actually a bit difficult for me
Hmm.
because the coherent framework is complex and difficult for people to engage with. Dan Siegel's been trying to write books for the public, but his writing is not for everybody because he does write in a complex way. I can recommend any book by him that people want to pick up.
Dan
By
Siegel.
Dr.
Yeah.
Daniel Siegel,
Hmm.
Siegel.
Hmm.
That's one thing. But there is no, the reason I wrote the booklet that you plugged before we started to talk is because I was looking for something where people were asking me to write it all up in a framework that is comprehensible, that people can read, that people don't need to have PhDs to understand, that it's accessible, everybody can understand it. So I first and foremost recommend the work of Dan Siegel, but I do recommend my book as well because that's the intention of it. It's meant for people to have this entire framework available to them to start working. This is why it's called Therapy Without a Therapist. I don't want any clients. I want everybody to be integrated. How about that? So the point is, at the moment, it's still a bit bits here and bits there and bits everywhere. But if people look for interpersonal neurobiology, which is Dan Siegel's work, people relate to different kinds of literature, to different kinds of information. It's hard for me to say because this is a little bit new here. This is a frontier. I'm a bit of an outlier in my field.
Yeah. Yeah.
Therapy is not yet practiced like this. I do, and my supervisees is already practicing that way, but it's yet to happen. So this is, I think this is the future, but it's not yet the present. So I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm plugging my own book, but that's where I know that everything is. Other than that, people should just read widely anything that interests them. Anything that tells you that there are good or bad feelings is wrong. Anything that tells you that you should manage your feelings is wrong. Anything that talks about the limbic brain in terms of saboteur and in terms of inner critic and in terms of procrastination is likely to be wrong. What people should be looking for are all the writings that are interested in fulfilling of potential. Nobody fulfills the potential by rejecting their emotions. It ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry that I'm just simply telling you the truth. It's really is how it is. People who can read Dan Siegel's work, go for it. It's fantastic. I read it. I love it. But it's not, I know from my client, it's not everybody's cup of tea. So.
Well, I will plug your book then because I absolutely, so that's it there. It's Therapy Without a Therapist, DIY, Good Mental Health and Growth. Avigail Abarbanel. Yeah.
What do you think of the cover?
I liked it. Yeah, actually, this guy looks like me.
The artist who allowed me to use this image is intended to show. Let's put the adult.
Yeah.
In the driving seat, not the kid, and I really like his choice of car, the red car, the limbic license plate.
I didn't see the license plate. Yeah, it says limbic on it. Yeah, I didn't see that. Yeah.
Very funny show.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the idea. The people can go to my website if you want to mention that later. And there is a bookmark there in the resources section. There is a bookmark, and the bookmark I created with a kind of a simple, basic exercise, which is the same one that's in the book, but in less detail.
Right.
But it's pretty clear.
Okay.
So if people want to go to my website and look on the resources, the website is fullyhuman.co.uk, fullyhuman.co.uk, and under resources, they will find the bookmark. And the bookmark simply tells you what to do. So if people want to know what to do, that's what you do.
Great.
Best thing to do is start practicing with kids. So you can believe me, and then see what happens.
Well, Avigail, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to hearing the feedback from people as well, from what they think as well, because as you say, this is not yet the present, and I think that for me, it was a revelation the first time I started to think this way. I found it personally to be incredibly empowering and practical and useful, and just taking charge of your own life. I mean, yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that personally. And thanks on behalf of everyone that's listening. I'm sure they've really enjoyed it. And for making the time to share your knowledge with us today.
And thank you so much for having me on and for such an intelligent conversation. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Take care of yourself. Thank you.
Welcome.